Welcome everyone to today's session on attacking and defending deepfakes. My name is Brandon Kovacs, and I'm from South Florida and have over 2 decades of experience working in cybersecurity. Although my interest in computers began at the age of 4, my professional journey started as a teenager, interning as a network security analyst for a managed security provider where I was tasked with performing real-time network defense and attack mitigation on behalf of large financial institutions and Fortune 500 organizations. Fast forward to today, and I now work on the red team here at Bishop Fox. We're going to start off with a quick high-level introduction to the current state of deepfakes. Then we'll dive into use cases for deepfake video and voice technology and share insight on how we're using them at Bishop Fox during red team engagements. I'll then walk you through exactly how the various deepfake models, studio software, and applications are wired together that enable you to conduct offensive security engagements that incorporate elements of video and voice impersonation, before we then demonstrate this in real time over a teleconferencing application. We'll then share tips and mitigation strategies that organizations can implement today based on lessons learned from running back-to-back red team engagements that have incorporated deepfakes. We have a lot to cover today, so let's get started. Deepfake attacks are evolving. We've witnessed a progression from the voice cloning of high-profile individuals for fraud to deepfake video that spreads misinformation on a global scale to thefts that are measuring tens of millions of dollars. Beginning in 2019, we witnessed the first known voice cloning incident where someone impersonated the chief executive officer of an energy firm in the United Kingdom, resulting in a $250,000 loss. A year later, in 2020, a voice impersonation of a company director for a multinational bank in the United Arab Emirates led to a $35 million loss. 3 years later, we witnessed the hacking of television networks and streaming providers to distribute deepfake videos of TV anchors to spread misinformation. And then finally, last year, in the beginning, we witnessed the first ever incident in which a finance worker at a multinational firm in Hong Kong believed he was speaking to the chief financial officer of his company on a live video call where he was instructed to send $25 million. The CFO, along with others on that call, turned out to be real-time deepfakes. As you can see, the complexity of these attacks are evolving, but so are the attackers' motives. Not only can deepfakes be used for financial gain or to distribute fake news, but also to compromise networks. And these attacks are increasing rapidly too. A recent report from the United Kingdom estimated a 1,500% increase in deepfakes over the past 2 years. And according to a report from Resemble AI, there were an estimated $200 million losses were reported just in Q1 alone of this year due to deepfakes. Lastly, according to the Intrust 2025 Identity Fraud Report, deepfakes now empower 40% of attacks against biometric fraud and identity systems. So how are deepfakes created? Creating a video or voice model involves several phases. First, we must collect the data. This can be accomplished by leveraging public sources, such as from social media, podcasts, press, and interviews. If you're a publicly traded organization, attackers can use recordings from quarterly earnings calls. Next, the data is prepared for training, and these sub-steps can vary based on the type of model that's being created. For example, in a voice model, we have to remove any background noise. When creating a video model, we have to specify the contours of the face of the person we're trying to impersonate. Next, the data set undergoes training, where the model framework attempts to recognize patterns and learns from that data. Over a series of iterations, the model becomes more accurate. That final trained model can then execute the task it was trained upon. So for example, changing the voice or the appearance through a process known as inferencing. And this can be explained in the following time-lapse video. The first column represents my friend Chris. The second column represents myself. The last column will be a mapping of the face from Chris onto my head. And as you can see, as we progress from 0 iterations and approach 2.5 million iterations, the model becomes more accurate and more lifelike in its ability to predict what I should look like at that point in time. Next, let's discuss ways we're using deepfakes here at Bishop Fox during offensive security engagements. So here's an example of ways we can leverage a deepfake voice model during an external breach attack scenario of a red team engagement. Using a model trained on an employee's voice, we could place a call to the service desk and attempt to manipulate their password, attempt to manipulate their account, such as resetting their password and associating a new multi-factor authentication device. From there, we're able to authenticate to the identity provider to gain access to the environment. As red teams are goal-driven assessments, this can be used as an initial attack vector to gain access and then move laterally throughout the environment until finally reaching that trophy goal or target that was defined for the engagement. And I know everyone loves a good war story, so we'll share a real-life example today. On a recent engagement, we had a client, a large financial institution, who had concerns regarding deepfakes and whether an attacker could leverage this technology to steal money. And although they had processes in place, they wanted to see if we could use a deepfake to socially engineer their employees to make them deviate from those processes. So to accomplish this, we cloned the CEO's voice and using public-facing interviews and podcasts they had appeared on. From there, we placed calls to the finance and accounting departments, where the employees quickly recognized the CEO's voice and obliged to do as we said. If you think about it, a real-life attacker who reaches a similar point and does elicit sensitive information, such as the routing number and account numbers for their bank, could perform an ACH withdrawal and steal real money. These activities are prohibited by the red team for obvious reasons. However, overall, we're able to demonstrate impact and help the client improve their processes and controls moving forward. Now let's talk about ways deepfakes can be used during an assumed breach scenario on a red team engagement. By impersonating a subject's likeness, such as how they sound and how they look, and joining a teleconferencing application, we could place video calls to other employees within their organization and instruct them to perform specific actions that enable us to move laterally until we hit that trophy goal that was defined for the engagement. For example, I'll give you another real-life example from another engagement we recently completed. On one engagement, a client shared a concern regarding the compromise of an employee workstation. They wanted to emulate and see what it would look like if an attacker were to gain access to a workstation. Could they potentially use a deepfake of that employee to place video calls to other people across the organization and then instruct them to make changes to highly privileged accounts? Mind you, this is an organization with a very strong security policy, including the requirement of joining video calls to establish identity before making any changes. In the end, what we found is that the deepfake voice and video model was sufficient to bypass their existing identity verification controls and allowed us to make the required changes and hit the trophy goal that was defined for this engagement. The outcome allowed the client to tighten up their technical and non-technical controls and processes and make some improvements moving forward. But not only can we use deepfakes during engagements, we can also use them to help our clients with their existing security awareness training programs. We've worked with a number of clients to create deepfake audio and video samples of their organization's public figures, such as their CEO, which have been then shared internally throughout their organization to raise awareness and used to also evaluate the efficacy of ongoing security awareness training. Next, let's talk about the offensive capabilities of deepfakes, of the software, the models and applications, and discuss how we actually wire all the components together. I'll walk you through our methodology for using deepfake voice and how we're routing these specific components together. By supplying our voice changer software with a trained model and using a microphone, supplying an audio buffer, we're then able to infer the audio in real time using something called the voice changer. The output is the source subject's voice that sounds exactly like them with a remarkable degree of accuracy. We take the output from the voice changer, and then we use something called a virtual audio cable, such as VB Audio for Windows or Black Hole for Mac. And then we use these audio cables to route the output from the voice changer and then map it as our virtual input on whatever application we want to use, such as Teams, Zoom, or perhaps even a soft phone to connect our computer to the telephone network and place actual phone calls. Next, I'm going to walk you through exactly how the voice changer works. First, after running the service, we load the dashboard and we supply it with a model and index file that we created. Mind you, everything here is running locally using Docker. We then specify the parameters. In this example, we're going to infer chunks that are 1 second long. What I found is that when doing real time, a 1 second chunk is a trade-off between real time and quality. And as I talk, "Hi, my name is Chris,"
Hi, my name is Chris.
my friend's voice comes out. Next, let's discuss our approach for deepfake video. So using our trained model and a webcam, we're going to inference the footage using a framework such as Deepfakes Live or Deep Live Cam to change our appearance into whoever the source subject is. I have a personal preference of using Deepfakes Live just because I found that I get better results in terms of frames per second to do this in a real-time aspect. However, other frameworks do exist that you could use to accomplish this too. From there, we're going to use studio software to capture the window output from whatever framework we decide to use. And then we're going to do a few things with that studio software. We're going to compose a scene to drop us into a virtual environment. And then finally, we're going to enable the virtual webcam of that software to then route the output of our scene into an application of our liking, such as Zoom, Teams, etc. Next, I'm going to walk you through all the various components and how they work. So Deepfakes Live is used to infer our video feed. It's open source tooling and available on GitHub. What we're going to do here is specify the parameters, and we're going to enable our camera. So we're going to enable our webcam. We already have the model pre-selected, and as you can see, as I move around, it starts driving the model. So as I move around, so does my friend Chris and his face. Next, let's talk about the scene composition. Now that we have our deepfake outputting, we're going to capture that window output using OBS. But first, let's drop in an image to create a scene. Here, we're going to drop myself into one of my colleagues' offices. Everyone meet Alith. This is where Alith typically does her phone calls from. So in this example, I'm going to take the window output from the Deepfakes Live software, and we're going to apply a few effects, specifically the chroma key filter to enable the green to delete the green from the green screen. And then next, we're going to use the crop and pad filter to remove any other artifacts that may exist. From there, it's just really a matter of fine-tuning to get it right and then put me into the correct position to where it looks like I'm sitting in the office. Next, let's talk about how we can configure our teleconferencing application. In this example, we're going to use Zoom. The first thing we're going to do is, within OBS, we're going to enable our virtual camera, as you can see highlighted. Next, we're going to open the Zoom application, and we're going to go to the settings. We're going to specify the camera to use our OBS virtual camera, which now loads our scene. And then we're also going to, on the audio setting, we're going to specify the output coming from our virtual audio cable as the microphone input. Now let's see what this looks like live in a real-time setting using Zoom. As you can see in this example, I'm having a Zoom conversation with myself, but it highlights the attacker's ability to wire all these components together and then feed it into a teleconferencing application to then conduct social engineering. In this example, we're using Zoom, but what happens if an attacker then wires into Teams or any other teleconferencing application to then place calls throughout your organization? What can we do? So let's talk about mitigation strategies, right? And what we're about to offer here is really composed of lessons learned, right? What we found has been most effective at stopping us and my colleagues when running red team engagements that incorporate elements of either video or voice impersonation. So let's talk about the first one, leveraging a company directory. Let's say you get a phone call out of the blue with a sense of urgency, and you're unfamiliar whether or not it's the actual person. It could sound like them, however, it may not actually be them. How can you mitigate this in the event that it could be a deep fake and someone spoofing their number? Very simple. Hang up the phone, look up the person's real phone number in the corporate directory and call that number back. What we found is that this is very effective against people who use caller ID manipulation, also known as call spoofing, to pretend that they are someone they're not. So for example, if I were to call you as your chief executive officer, it would show the CEO's phone number as the caller ID, and if you have his contact stored, it would just show his name. However, if you were to hang up the phone and then look up his real number and call him back, I, as the attacker, wouldn't be able to intercept that phone call. It would go to the real person. So it's a great way to ensure you're talking to the real person and you're not just going by what the caller ID says. Another example is adding a layer of multi-factor authentication. Obviously, we want to make this as frictionless as possible, but if you think about it, a mutually agreed upon passphrase shared between two parties. Now, there's probably many ways to go about how to implement this internally, but think about it this way. Tell me something only Brandon would know. There was an incident a few months ago, I believe it was sometime last year, in which someone cloned the voice of the CEO of Ferrari Motors. The attacker placed a call to someone within the finance department at Ferrari trying to elicit information that they could use to then, steal money. The receiver on the call thought it was the actual CEO. However, he was a bit hesitant and asked for one piece of information. He goes, "Yes, I'll do whatever you want, sir. However, tell me this. What is the name of the book that I gave you last week?" Because the caller couldn't answer that piece of information, it mitigated that attack. So if you think about it, having that layer of two-factor authentication or that secret passphrase or code word that's shared between two parties can be used when pressed with a sense of urgency and you suspect something it may not be that person. Next, let's talk about video deepfakes. So most models are not trained on facial obstructions and can break really easily. So for example, actions such as holding an object in front of a head, such as a cup, turning the head 360 degrees, all these things can break the ability for the model to do face swapping and make it very clear that you're not talking to the real person. Also, in order to determine whether or not someone is actually in the environment or scene that they kind of make themselves out to be, you can ask them to interact with objects within the scene. And the last example I showed, I made it look like I was sitting in Elite's office. Had someone on the receiving end of the Zoom call ask me, "Hey, can you reach for the picture frame behind you and hold it in front of your head?" I wouldn't be able to do that because it's a green screen. So by asking the person to interact with random objects within the environment, you can use that to determine if it's actually a real video. And let's actually go into what this looks like. In this example, we're holding my hand in front of my head. As you can see, it looks like a star imploding. Next, we'll hold a water bottle and wave it in front of my head. And we see similar results. The model breaks up when an object is obstructing the ability for the model to do the frameworks or to do the face swapping. Same thing by holding a cell phone in front of my face. The idea here is that most models, at least the current state of deepfakes, and this can change in a few years, but in the current state of deepfakes, most models break when an object is held directly in front of it or and also when the face is held sideways, as you can see here. In conclusion, deepfakes can be leveraged legitimately by cybersecurity professionals, offensively during security engagements, such as red teaming, and also defensively through cybersecurity awareness training and education. Organizations can implement policies to help mitigate deepfake attacks, and they have high impact in stopping us and our ability to succeed, and when we've run these in the past, and they cost nothing to implement. For those who do want to stay connected, you can follow me on LinkedIn. And also we'll also are going to be doing the deepfake demo and the AI Village at DEF CON this summer. So I hope to see you all there. Last year we had quite a bit of interest, and I look forward to doing this again next year. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. So let's see what we got. Move the mic over. Can you elaborate on the attack chain leveraging biometric data? Yeah, so simply, the first step is obviously collecting the data. Well, first, what is the data itself? Some identity verification services are looking at voice as a way of identifying people. So if an attacker were to try and impersonate someone by cloning their voice, that attack would first have to start off by collecting the data itself. So if this is a public figure of an organization, you can just look at public information that exists. So, for example, podcast, earnings calls, press, interviews, etc. You find enough data, you then process it. For those who want more information, like the steps involved to train the data, like detailed, I go into that in really great detail in my Cyber Mirage webcast we did last year. It's literally step by step. I show you exactly what you need to do. But there's a few steps you need to prepare the data. So, for example, removing the background noise, pops, any sort of artifacts that exist in the audio. So it's a clean data set. You need approximately, you can do it anywhere between 15 minutes of spoken speech up to like an hour, right? What you really are looking for is a phonetically diverse data set when it comes to speech. Once you have that data set, you then train the model. You can use open source tooling and frameworks to do that. Specifically, we're using what's called retrieval voice conversion, RVC. It's open source. It's available on GitHub. And again, we dive into how to create an RVC model in great detail, step by step, on the Cyber Mirage podcast from last year. But once you have that final trained model, you plug it into the voice changer. You have a microphone. You feed the audio that's coming out of the microphone, supply it to the voice changer so it infers it against that particular RVC model. You take that output from there and then wire it into a soft phone, right, which would then allow an attacker to place telephone calls. You call whatever service you're trying to call, and then if they're using voice for, voice for identification to identify the caller, you sound like that person. And we found that some of these voice verification, identity verification platforms do fall victim to these types of attacks. And there's a bunch of frameworks that exist. The RVC is an audio to audio framework. There's text to speech. There's different architectures and frameworks that exist, but specifically, I'm using RVC in all my stuff. Deepfakes Live is paid software. No, so Deepfakes Live is free. So there's two components required. There's Deepfakes Lab. Deepfakes Lab is open source software that's used to create and train the video model. Once you have that Deepfakes Lab model, you then supply it to Deepfakes Live. It's a lot of word soup going on right now. But once you take the Deepfakes Lab model, train it there, supply it to Deepfakes Live, and Deepfakes Live is used for inferencing. So we take the video feed, throw it at Deepfakes Live, it turns you into whoever, outputs it into a window, and then from there we're using OBS, which is also free software, to then capture that window output, build the scene, and enable the virtual webcam to then feed that into wherever. Would you share the hard specs required for voice and video? Yeah, so like I said, for voice, you want a phonetically diverse data set that's at least 15 minutes long. That's what I found is you get the best results. A minimum 15 minutes, the more the merrier. You don't need too much because you don't need too much repetition, but you just want to have enough diversity and coverage. And that should be sufficient for creating a voice model. With the use of actual voice recording, does the deepfake negate voice print identification? I don't know what you mean by that. Are you asking does the deepfake beat the voice print identification? In some instances, yes, it has in the past. My buddy Bryce, he did a talk about that not too long ago about beating identity verification systems, specifically using voice models. Can you put your hand in front of your face? Yes, this is really me. Are there any tools that conduct a forensic investigation to help in case of cybercrime? I don't know. There's a lot of platforms that exist right now that claim to do deepfake detection. Some of them have like public facing portals where you can like upload a file and it'll run, analytics on it and all sorts of detectors. How accurate they are, that's really it's subjective, because some things work, some things don't work, some things only work for a matter of time, and then people figure out how to defeat it, and then that works for a moment of time to defeat it, and then it's like a cat and mouse game, right, going back and forth. But in terms of the tools themselves, I don't really know of any that exist at the moment. So yeah, I don't really know how to answer that one. Have you have you considered using deepfakes in a physical security scenario? Absolutely. What I think would be interesting is if I mean, again, yeah, we haven't used it yet, but I do think there are valid use cases for it. So, for example, if you have a public figure of an organization like the CEO, right? Everyone knows the CEO's voice, at least most people do. I think it could be interesting to, as the CEO's voice, calling people within the organization to instruct them to do things, like calling the secretary to say, hey, can you add such and such vendor to the visitor log? They're coming on Tuesday to replace whatever, or to, replace the modem or something like that. Oh, by the way, give them access to the network cabinet. Right. So I do think there's valid use cases for using deepfake voice for physicals. Yeah, maybe one day we'll do like that Jason Bourne thing where they hack into the video feeds and swap everyone on the CCTV's footage. That'd be cool. But I don't think we'd be doing that on a real physical, though. It's more for the movies. What hardware do you need for real-time voice deepfake? What if you use online tools? What about the delay? Is that an issue? Yeah, so again, I go into all of this into my Cyber Mirage. That's more of like the technical bits of how the deepfakes are created and trained from scratch. But in terms of usage, everything is done in using a consumer grade hardware. So for example, I'm using a gaming laptop. It has a 4090 GPU, 16 gigabytes of VRAM. I'm running both models, the video model, the Deepfakes Lab video model, and the RVC audio model. I'm running them both at the same time on my laptop. And what I found is that you get the best results when running something locally, obviously for latency. Because yeah, if you think about it, if you're to render in the cloud, there's going to be latency between capturing the video from your computer, pushing it up to the cloud, pulling it back, especially if you're doing it like 1080p, which we are using a DSLR camera. I think, yeah, it's like 100M setting on the camera, the highest quality setting. So if we were to take this video feed and push it to the cloud, it would introduce too much latency, right? And overhead in order to do this in a real-time setting. You can use the cloud for training models, but for running them and inferencing, I found that you get the best results when doing this in real time when everything is local. But yeah, you can go ahead and use cloud instances when training models. Specifically, we use A100 instances with 40 gigabytes of RAM, and that's sufficient for doing the RVC model, but also sufficient for doing the video model at a 384 resolution size. and doing it in a sufficient amount of time, right? It's a fast GPU. It's relatively fast. It's faster than any consumer grade GPU out there that exists right now. It has enough VRAM to do the job. We don't have to pay, more for like a crazy GPU with 80 gigs of VRAM when it's not necessary. And I think it costs like $1.29 an hour or something like that. So they're kind of cost efficient. So yeah, they're great for training, but I wouldn't recommend using them for running them for doing the real time aspect once the models are trained. I do that all local. Let's see. Will you release the workshop on how to use the software? Again, yeah, everything's in the Cyber Mirage webcast. I go into great detail on how to use everything. So yes. Could you ask the deepfake to sing something simple like happy birthday? Can voice replicators do that? I mean, you're not asking the deepfake, you're basically doing it yourself, right? You're basically talking into a microphone and out comes whoever's voice. So you would just have to sing happy birthday yourself. So yeah, totally possible. Um, who gets hit by these attacks most commonly? Is there a common target? Who gets hit by these attack? Everyone. There was a crazy, I don't know the statistic off the top of my head, but there was a crazy statistic where the majority of like the Fortune 100 was hit with some sort of deep fake within this past year. Is there a common target? I would imagine like the finance department, because most attackers are financially motivated. Finance and IT, right? Because you either want to hack them to steal money or hack them to gain access and deepen that access. So those are the two avenues to go about doing that. If you use online tone delay, how does the voice buffer work? How does that help sync the audio and video to make it seamless? Voice buffer. So when we're doing the RVC voice model, we do them in a series of chunks, right? So as I talk into the microphone, the audio is split into a series of chunks. There's a trade-off between doing them in chunks of 100 milliseconds each and doing them in trade-offs of 1,000 milliseconds or 1 second, right? Versus a chunk of 5 seconds at a time. The bigger the chunk size, the more accurate when you're taking that chunk of the source audio, my speech, and then inferring it against the model, you get the best results when it has more data, right? So if you apply a 10 millisecond chunk size, it'll inference it really fast, but it doesn't sound as good. Whereas if you supply a 5-second chunk size, it'll sound great, but the audio is not going to come out for 5 seconds later, right? So what I found is that around a 1 second chunk is sufficient, or buffer is sufficient for getting quality results in a real time / near real time setting. Because if you think about it, at the end of the day, we're just taking the output and then streaming it onto Teams, Zoom, Skype, or whatever. So the end user doesn't really notice. In terms of syncing the audio and video, yeah, so there's an offset between the audio and video. Deepfakes Live has a video offset delay parameter. So what you have to do is kind of find that sweet spot between whatever chunk size you end up using on the voice changer. And me, for it's chunk 384, which is exactly 1,024 milliseconds, or 1 second. And then on the Deepfakes Live software, I set the video delay to around 1,800 milliseconds. And what I found is that on the 4090 laptop, between the inferencing of both models running in parallel, they both will then come out at the same time. But again, this takes a lot of experimentation and trial and error to try and get the correct parameters that work for you. Every system is different. Everyone is going to get different results. You kind of just got to play around with the software to fine tune it. I think I've answered all the questions so far. Happy to answer any more questions while you guys still have me. Yeah, just feel free to type them in the chat. I'll give a few more seconds before we decide to call it quits. All right, so I think we are out of questions. And yeah, like I said, I've done a webcast last year called Cyber Mirage. It's about how attackers are leveraging AI for social engineering, really in the context for doing deepfakes. We go into really great depth of how deepfake models can be created and trained using strictly open source software. I go into yeah, I break down step by step, slide by slide, to show you exactly how they're created from scratch. So if for those who are interested in more information on how to actually do that for like technical, it's more technical. I would definitely check that out. And it's great for you to be able to emulate that to create deep fakes for like whether offensive purposes or maybe you want to create them for training purposes, right? Go create a deep fake of your CEO, take the video, distribute it on your company's SharePoint and intranet to then share with your employees and raise awareness, to help reinforce, whatever cybersecurity awareness training programs you guys already have. So yeah, definitely use that knowledge. Really excited we got to do this today. So thank you, everyone.